This morning, one of the most powerful Texans in Congress pushing a new way to punish China over the spy balloon. Chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee, McCall, with us in a moment. We watched a rowdy State of the Union speech. Congressman Mark from D.C. on what this changes now for Democrats. Governor Abbott told state agencies to stop considering diversity when it comes to hiring. And Texas Democrats got fewer leadership positions in the new legislature. It's a partial win for grassroots Republicans. State Rep Slayton with us on their next move.
Inside Texas Politics with Jason Whiteley starts now.
Good Sunday morning to you. Committees are set. Now the legislative process in Austin really begins. First, though, the headlines this morning. One of the most talked about topics in Austin right now is whether to legalize casino gambling. A bill in the legislature right now would let voters decide the answer to that question. Las Vegas casinos have been lobbying hard to build several destination resorts in the state's biggest cities. A poll last month by the University of Houston showed that 3 out of 4 Texans think this should go to a vote. But lawmakers still have to approve it first before it ever gets to your ballot. After all that pressure from members of his own party, House Speaker Dade Phelan still named some Democrats to lead House committees. There are 34 House committees. Last session, Phelan gave 13 of them to Democrats. This session, though, Phelan reduced that to only 8 committees for Democrats. A group of vocal Republicans have argued against it, saying the GOP has majorities and it should lead all facets of the legislature. Governor Greg Abbott is telling state agencies not to consider diversity when it comes to hiring. The Texas Tribune first reported this, saying Abbott's office sent a memo saying that diversity, equity, and inclusion policies violate federal and state employment laws. The governor's office said hiring cannot be based on factors other than merit. DEI is designed to promote underrepresented groups, but Abbott and Republicans have pushed back at policies they say represents woke policies of the left. We begin this morning with one of the most powerful Texans in Congress facing a growing threat in the East. The spy balloon has exacerbated tensions with China. This morning, a Texan proposes new legislation in response to that. Congressman McCall represents a wide swath of Central Texas, and he also chairs the powerful House Foreign Affairs Committee. He joined us from the Capitol in D.C.
Chairman McCall, it's good to see you again. Thanks for coming back on the program here. You've called for a swift response to China after the spy balloon incident. Some time has now passed since that happened. What do you think the response should be from the United States?
Well, I think the president needs to send a very clear message to China. This is unacceptable, and we will not tolerate this. We will shoot down aircraft in our airspace. And again, it doesn't help with our relationship. What I will be doing as chairman of Foreign Affairs is stopping the export of technology to China that they then turn around to use in their most advanced weapon systems. A good example of that, Jason, is their hypersonic missile that circled the globe and landed with precision in China that can carry a nuclear payload. This is very dangerous time right now with our adversaries like Russia, China, Iran, North Korea. And they steal a lot of our intellectual property, but for God's sakes, we don't have to sell the technology to them that they then turn around to point at us.
As far as stopping exports, what specific products or items would you like to see banned?
I think any national security supply chain. I did this with the semiconductor chip manufacturing with my Chips for America bill, a bipartisan piece of legislation that will pull manufacturing out of Taiwan that now controls about 90% of the global supply and make those national security chips in the United States rather than countries vulnerable to China. That's a great step forward in what we need to be doing, but we need to be doing that also with rare earth materials, with medical supplies, and I hope to be working on those kind of bills in this Congress. Quite frankly, Jason, I get asked a question with the divided Congress, what can you really get done? And I think this is really one of the areas where you have a lot of public opinion, American support for that we could get done in a bipartisan way.
There have been reports, Mr. Chairman, that the U.S. military was able to actually jam some of the communications on that spy balloon so it couldn't operate over the U.S. even as it continued to drift eastward there. Have you heard? Is that the case?
My understanding is we did jam the communications, which is important, right? They can't signal back to the mothership in Beijing. But then what was allowed to operate at the same time? And why wasn't it shot down at the beginning? If there were some intelligence we were gleaning from the balloon as it crossed U.S. airspace, that would be, to me, a better argument for not shooting it down, but we haven't heard that yet.
As chair of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, do you plan to hold any hearings to get any more answers to your questions?
We'll be having a lot of hearings on China.
But as far as the spy balloon goes in the administration?
Yeah, I'd like to know why, how do we allow this to happen? Why didn't we, if they're in U.S. airspace, I think this is something that resonated, across my district, across the state of Texas and the country. Why was this allowed to happen?
Finally, let's talk about the debt ceiling here. You and fellow Republicans in Congress are anticipating, obviously, a vote on raising the debt ceiling. But you say, and the party says, we've got to have spending cuts first if we're going to raise this debt ceiling. Where exactly would you want to see cuts happen in the budget?
I mean, it's hard for me to imagine the federal budget not having some waste in it that we can't cut. I mean, we're talking, Jason, we're handing down right now and approaching $32 trillion of debt to our children and grandchildren. I think that's immoral. And a lot of that debt was accumulated really in the last 6 years. So this is a bipartisan problem that both parties are responsible for. And I think both parties are responsible to fix the problem. All we're saying as Republicans is, look, let's cap the spending at 2022 levels. We spent enough in 2022. We don't have to increase that spending after 2022.
Chairman McCall, it's always good to see you. We appreciate the time.
You too, Jason. And, having grown up in Dallas, it's great to be on WFAA.
Now to a stunning story we saw in the news the other day. Texas DPS investigated itself for failures in Uvalde there, and that inquiry is now over. One trooper resigned, one was fired, another is being fired. 3 in total, 3 out of 91 troopers there that day. And the head of DPS, Steve McCall, he refuses to resign after his agency failed Uvalde last May. Matthew Watkins is the managing editor for news and politics at the Texas Tribune. Matthew, thanks for being on the program with us this week. Victims, families, and many in the public have called for accountability after law enforcement failed to act. DPS, though, sounds like it's moving on from this.
Yeah, I mean, DPS seems to have taken the stance all throughout that it wasn't their responsibility to take control of this situation and, act when, these smaller kind of overwhelmed local police departments were responding to this as well. That, they've pointed to the local police chief, the school police chief, and saying that they should have stepped in and stormed that school while the children were trapped inside. But, they seem to have reached the conclusion that only 3 of their 90+ officers who responded, failed to the extent that they need to be punished in some way.
And Matthew, do you expect the state lawmakers to do anything to call for any other accountability within DPS?
Yeah, it doesn't seem like DPS is targeted. I think there is a legitimate question to be asked about whether its role should be increased in these major events that happen in small towns and overwhelmed police departments. But there hasn't been a whole lot of movement right now from the legislature to address that aspect, at least, of the Uvalde shooting. All
right, sounds good. Matthew, back to you in a moment. Thank you very much. Coming up next here, that rowdy State of the Union speech last Tuesday. Did Democrats hear what they needed to hear? We will ask Congressman Mark Vesey in a moment. And Texas Democrats got fewer leadership positions in the new legislature. That is a partial win for grassroots Republicans. State Rep Brian Slayton with us when we come back. And it is astonishingly easy to steal a piece of property in Texas. Thieves have stolen homes, a Sam's Club, a Burger King, even a church. Will Texas lawmakers finally stop these dirty property deeds? This new episode of Y'all-ticks out this morning. You can download it wherever you get your podcasts. Welcome back to Inside Texas Politics. Democrats are emboldened after President Biden's State of the Union speech last week, but big issues lie ahead in the coming months: China, Social Security, and the debt ceiling. Congressman Mark Vesey represents parts of Dallas and Fort Worth. He was in the House chamber for the president's address and joined us afterwards.
Hi there, Congressman. We saw President Biden at the State of the Union speech. Unlike we've seen him in a while, he was energetic, a really strong speech. The question, did Democrats hear what they needed to hear from him?
Yeah, I think the Democrats definitely heard from the president what they needed to hear. He talked about his accomplishments, which are lengthy. If you think about the bipartisan infrastructure bill and some of the projects here in the DFW area that we have been wanting to get funded for a long time that are finally getting funded because he was able to usher that bill into law. That's going to be huge. When you think about the Inflation Reduction Act and some of the measures that were in there that will also bring money here to the North Texas area. And again, not just here to the North Texas area, but the entire country. And so he has a lot of accomplishments. I'm very proud of those and glad that he touted them.
President Biden has not announced whether he's going to run for re-election yet. That's supposed to come up maybe in March, maybe in April, I believe his team is hinting. Do you think he's up for the job for another 4 years?
Oh yeah, I think that he's definitely up for the job. You saw him during the speech. He was energetic. He was very lively, and he did a wonderful job of selling America, which I think is important. I think the previous president, there were some questions about whether or not America was going to be a major player at the table anymore. There were questions about whether or not we were going to continue to support democracy around the world. There were questions from our NATO allies on whether or not, America, which has really been the standard bearer for our system since post-World War II, whether or not we were going to continue to advocate for that system. And Biden showed us that, hey, America's back. We're in the game. Forget about the previous 4 years from my predecessor. America is again a serious world player on the stage, particularly when it comes to upholding democracy, both at home and abroad.
Congressman Michael McCall on the other side of the aisle was on our program a little earlier here and said that Republicans want to keep spending levels at the 2022 levels instead of raising them in 2023. This is going to come up when the debt ceiling fight happens. Where do you stand on that? And do you see room for compromise at all, Congressman?
I think that we've never had an issue with raising the debt ceiling, and there shouldn't be one now. We raised it when Donald Trump was president, and we need to raise it accordingly with this president as well. And so I think that the president is certainly going to talk with the Republicans in earnest. I mean, he's been doing this a while now, from being a U.S. senator for 30 years and then being the vice president.
Right.
So he knows how to negotiate. But at the end of the day, we have to raise it. And if we don't, the financial calamity that's going to be caused in local Dallas and Fort Worth taxpayers, retirement plans, their stock portfolios, their real estate holdings. If we have some sort of a financial calamity or collapse because the Republicans are trying to play this game with the debt ceiling, it's going to be all on them because the president is working with them in earnest.
Congressman, thank you for the time this morning.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jason.
It wasn't a shutout like some grassroots Republicans wanted, but Texas Democrats now have less influence in the state legislature. House Speaker Dade Phelan announced committee assignments the other day. Last session, Democrats led 13 of the 34 committees. This session, they only have 8 committees. That is a partial win for grassroots Republicans who had been pressuring Phelan to end Democratic leadership positions. State Rep Brian Slayton there among them. He represents parts of Northeast Texas, and we spoke to him during a brief trip out of state.
Representative Slayton, welcome to the program here. A lot of anxiety leads up to committee assignments in Austin. How surprising was this partial win for grassroots Republicans?
Well, thank you for having me on, Jason. It's good to visit with you. I think it's a mixed bag. I think a lot of the grassroots have been told that it's not going to happen. Nothing's going to change. We're going to continue to give the same percentage as last time or as represented in the House body. They've been told that for so long. And then to see what happened on day 2, where, the ability to even have the discussion was totally killed. So for it to go from 13 down to 8, I think there's grassroots that are, they're happy about that, but they're still not completely satisfied because we're still giving away chairmanships to 8 committees that are, they're going to deal with very important things here in Texas, and someone from, different, different political parties going to be making those decisions.
So what's the next move then right now?
Well, as far as Democrat chairs go, we just wait and talk about it for next time. Maybe we can have the debate and discussion, next session. But right now we focus on the work at hand, right? Committees have been assigned. And of course, there's a lot of priorities. Everybody comes down and visits Austin, has priorities, but there's one group that has largely been ignored for quite some time, and that's the Republican Party of Texas. And their delegates and their voters, they give legislative priorities, and they're given, watered down versions, or not even given hearings in some cases. And we have seven more left.
Brian, explain that, because people watching this will say, well, what are you talking about, Representative Slayton? The Republicans have the governorship. They have the majorities in both chambers. How are Republicans not getting what they want?
Well, for instance, constitutional carry. That has been something that the grassroots have been pushing in Texas and at convention for, I believe, 14 or 16 years, probably longer. There were people involved, but where it was a bigger issue highlighted and people were asking for it, that was over a decade. And we didn't really get our first hearing on it till last session. And that was basically just permitless carry. And so it's not true constitutional carry. It's still a good bill. I'm glad it passed. I'm glad it's into law, but it's not full constitutional carry. And the fact that it takes so long to get hearings on legislative priorities, and that's where the problem and frustration comes into. We ask for the same things over and over.
Representative Slayton, we appreciate you making time for us. Thank you so much.
Yeah, glad to be here. Thank you, Jason.
Governor Abbott told state agencies to stop considering diversity when it comes to hiring. Just one of the things the governor is in the news for over the last week. We'll discuss it all coming up next on the Roundtable.
This is Inside Texas Politics with Jason Whiteley.
Time now for Reporters Roundtable to put the headlines in perspective. Matthew Watkins back with us from Austin and the Texas Tribune. Bud Kennedy is here from the Fort Worth Star-Telegram, and Bernadine Steptoe, of course, political producer at WFAA in Dallas. Matthew, let's start with you and Governor Abbott telling Texas Tech and other state agencies not to hire anyone, spend public money in any way that punishes anyone to achieve diversity. You need to hire based on merit, he says. Was this more of a surprise to universities or state agencies, or whom?
Yeah, I mean, I think in some ways it's not a huge surprise because we've seen the Republican Party be really against these diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives across the country. You really saw a lot of this in Florida with Governor Ron DeSantis and Abbott kind of jumping in this way. It's a little bit vague in terms of what actually he's banning, though, and how far that goes. Can you consider diversity as you're trying to build a diverse agency or a diverse school to reflect the diversity of the state? I think this kind of backlash, though, that you're seeing from conservatives could continue, and something we might see come up a little bit more during the legislative session.
Bud, based on that, is this purely political then by Abbott?
Well, he's exactly right. Most of the Republican Party has opposed affirmative action, using that term, for 30 years. There have been a few exceptions. Jack Kemp, Paul Ryan, some people, supported it. It's important with a governor to know that he's a lawyer, and when he writes letters, he parses his words very carefully, as we saw with a lot of the COVID warnings last year. In this case, he says not to spend state money to punish anyone to achieve diversity. He doesn't say not to achieve diversity. So if you have people who have equal qualifications, it doesn't prevent choosing someone to achieve diversity. But it just says, don't spend money and don't hurt anybody.
And semantics are very important to the governor, Bernadine, but you have a skeptical look on your face the entire time here.
Yes, because I think it's ridiculous. Come on, Jason. The initiatives that are in place have been in place to level the playing field for those who cannot get into these kinds of schools and jobs or whatever. And to imply, see what he's saying implies that these people are not qualified to get into these jobs, which is another ridiculous contention, because usually they're overly qualified to even enter into level positions. So it is political, but it could be viewed as something else. And I won't get into that racial aspect, which could be viewed, but it's just ridiculous.
Bernadine, what's next then on this? Do you expect legal action to be a part of the fallout of this, or what?
Well, it depends on how they apply it, because as Bud said, it can be vague.
Right.
And it is moving further and further toward the thinking that people of color, marginalized people are getting special treatment when they're actually not. But anyway, that's my view on it.
Bud, let me ask another issue with the governor in the news the other day. The governor's State of the State speech is this week in a private studio in San Marcos. It's televised. Reporters are barred. This is the second time, I believe, he has done this. What's the whole point of this?
You know, Jason, the last time it was because of COVID, but this time it's just for the principle of it. He's going down to San Marcos to a private location. I'm told this is an auditorium. It has room for about 200 people. The legislature's all invited. That's 150. The other 50 seats will be filled by San Marcos business leaders. Apparently, they're more important than the reporters who cover the Capitol on a daily basis or any other people in Texas. This is a national telecast or a statewide telecast, but it's very different from the governor's traditional presentation of the state of the state.
And Matthew, the governor, obviously, as we all know, likes to remain very scripted, and this seems like that he's just continuing that pursuit.
Yeah, it's an opportunity to kind of control the environment that he is in. We, of course, saw in the recent State of the Union address a pretty rowdy crowd. If he controls who goes in, he kind of controls what the reaction is and everything like that. You know, we as journalists would love the opportunity to ask him questions afterwards and you know, ask for clarifications or
Sure.
challenge or question some of the things he says. Abbott seems pretty uninterested in allowing that to happen.
Matthew, stay on him there at the Texas Tribune. We appreciate it. Guys, thanks so much for joining us for the Roundtable. We always appreciate you joining us as well for Inside Texas Politics. Hope you can join us next week as we take you inside Texas politics. Until we see you then, have a great week.